Now, I have something to share with you, and it is this. I've done something that you haven't done in Colorado. In fact, I had one of the lift operators tell me it may be unprecedented, that maybe not only you haven't done it, maybe nobody has done it. And Topher kind of referred to it at the beginning of our time together, advancing up the mountain and falling down. Well, the way that you do that is you get on one of those T-bar lifts, that are a little bit challenging. My 9-year-old had advanced up the mountain ahead of me, and I couldn't let him go down, the double black alone. So I get on my snowboard, and I'm going to go up, and I fall. But because my 9-year-old is up there, I just hold on to the rope, and I'm like, I'm not letting go. So I don't know if you've seen one of those, social media apps that have a Jerry of the day. It's referring to people like me that do something really amateur. And I just held on for like 300 yards and just let this thing drag me up the mountain. The lift operator comes out and is like, bro, never have I seen anybody hold on the entire way. Then my 9-year-old reveals to me that people were making fun of me behind me because my pants may or may not have kind of been dragged down. They may or may not have seen my backside. I'm not really sure. That's called advancing up the mountain, if you didn't know, just being dragged. I've got some snow rash to prove it if you don't believe me. So advancing. We're going to look at what the Apostle Paul from prison writes about advancing. But first, how many of you, raise your hand, have you ever gotten overly competitive while playing that game? Okay? Come on. Admit it. Confess. You're still a Christian if you get competitive in Monopoly. Okay, the Ceders may or may not get way more competitive than we need to when we're playing Monopoly. But as you know, this is the game where the whole name of the game is advancing around the board so you can collect those $200. Collecting property and cash is the name of the game. We fight before we even start playing. We fight over who gets to be what piece, right? The little game pieces. My kids are already in a war before we even start playing the game. But I want you to notice, that paper money. Because something happens if you're like me when you're playing Monopoly, like when you get into it, you start to think that paper money actually matters. And it does for a couple hours while you're playing, or if you play like us, like a whole day, because the game can take a little while. But I don't know, if you're like me, occasionally when you played Monopoly, you walk away from it and go, why did I get that competitive? I mean, it's a game. And the money, my bank account in real life isn't any more inflated than before I played. And I beat my kids, or they beat me. And there's really no glory in winning. But I walk away from the game wondering, was advancing around that board worth how competitive I just got? Does that money come with me when I've walked away from the game? Does all that property, even if you got Park Place and a really elite property, does it really matter when you walk away? Well, if you're not careful in life, I was reminded of the year my life changed in college. If you're not careful in life, I'll never forget at a Campus Crusade for Christ winter conference at the University of Texas, the guy that was preaching said, if you're not careful, you can get to the end of your life and realize you've advanced in the wrong thing. You've accumulated property, you've accumulated money, you've won in the ways of the world, but what if when you look at God, you realize, I didn't win? And it feels like a profound waste of time. This gentleman that was preaching said, here's what God's gonna do at the end of your life. He's gonna open up a book and blow, and everything you did for yourself is just gonna blow right off the page. And then he said, only one life to live and it soon will pass. Only what's done for Christ will last. And so it's possible that we would advance in life and get to the end of our life and realize, I've just got paper money. I've got property, but I'm not sure that I advanced in the right thing. Now, I want to ask you this question. What is the primary thing you're trying to advance in this new year that has just begun? What's the primary thing? What is worth your life? What isn't a waste of time? What isn't like paper money and paper titles in Monopoly? Anybody ever been to the Atlanta airport? Okay, that's a big one. It's bigger than ours. You may or may not know that. I've got some facts here. Of all the airports in America, this is the one that had the most traffic last year. 45 million travelers came through the Atlanta airport last year. Did you know it's 6.8 million square feet, this airport? It is huge. 152 domestic gates, 40 international gates. Well, last year when I was going to our denomination's national gathering, I had to pass through Atlanta, or maybe it was even a couple years ago, I can't remember exactly. But I remember going through the Atlanta airport and realizing how big it was. And I had to walk that 6.8 million, square foot property to get to my gate. And I finally relaxed, called my wife, caught up on some things, waiting for my flight. I can finally relax. And when I realized, it's about time we board, I look up at the little TV screen and it's not the right gate. So now I have to realize that I've advanced all the way through this airport only to figure out I'm at the wrong gate. And luckily I made my flight. I had to, retrace my steps, go back to another gate. What if your life is like that? What if you get to the end of it and you stand before God and realize I'm at the wrong gate? I have advanced all the way through life only to realize that the things that I have prioritized, I'm going to list some things. None of these things are inherently bad things, but are they the ultimate thing? When I was young, teenager, I can remember thinking, advancing in school, advancing in athletics, advancing in my career, advancing in popularity in my fraternity, advancing in, just through leadership roles within my fraternity. All those things were very, very important to me. And in high school, it was sports and athletics, getting into a great college. When you get older, when you get out of school, I want to advance in my company. I want to advance, to acquire things. I want to advance in how much money I make. I want to advance in the things that I own. Let me just tell you, none of those things are bad. But if that's all that you advance in life, I promise you, it'll be the wrong gate when this life is over. It'll feel like monopoly if that's all you cared about. And that was an unsettling thought when I was in college at this Campus Crusade for Christ event. And what I want to tell you here, we're about to read the book of Philippians, chapter 1. We're going to look at 6 verses. And in this book is written by a man named Paul. He is in a Roman prison. And he's going to talk about the incomparable thing to advance. Something that doesn't have any comparison. It's in a category all by itself. And we're going to look at what he teaches his friends in a town. Pastor Dave last week gave us a great introduction to the town of Philippi. So Paul is going to write, he's writing a letter from a Roman prison, from Rome, to this beloved church, these people that he loves. And he's going to tell us what is incomparable as it relates to this concept of advance. So let's look at these words together. If you want to open up your Bible to Philippians 1, this is verse 12 through 18. You can just follow along on the screen. Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me, remember he's in prison, has actually served, here's that word, to advance the gospel. Okay, I want to pause right there for just a moment and make sure you know why he's even writing this letter. People tell us that Paul wrote this letter because his friends in Philippi were so worried, they were in pity for him. Oh, poor Paul, he's in a prison. And by the way, if you went to jail in Rome, they didn't give you blankets. In a very human moment, in some of his letters, he will ask for things like, can you bring me my blanket? They don't give out blankets in a Roman prison. In fact, you didn't eat. They didn't bring you food. If your friends didn't bring you food, you didn't eat. And so he's in prison, and his friends had likely written a letter to their pastor in Philippi saying, or the Philippian church had probably written Paul a letter that prompted his reply, the book of Philippians, that was, we feel so sorry for you. We know you're incarcerated and know the gospel's not advancing now that you're in jail. And Paul writes in response, no. I don't want you, brothers and sisters, beloved family members. I don't want you to worry about me. Actually, what has happened has served to advance the gospel. I love the word he uses here. I want you to know. It's a Greek word, gnosko. When my wife and I took Greek together, it was one of our favorite words. It's a word where you would describe marital intimacy. I want you to know in an intimate way, know and keep on knowing that I'm okay. I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that you don't need to worry about me. I'm touched that you're worried about me, but I want you to know that what has happened to me, in my incarceration has actually served to advance the gospel. And as a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. And it's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, that Christ is preached, and because of this, I will rejoice. So that's what he writes, and there's kind of two movements in those words, and we're just going to look at two main points here. And the first one is this, that here's the thing to devote your life to, according to this letter. We are to prioritize the advance of the gospel over everything. And you see that in the Apostle Paul's imprisonment, that he has his eyes on one kind of advance. And he says, you don't need to worry about me because the only thing I care about, it's happening. The advance of the gospel, it's happening. Now, I have some good news for you. If you missed, a couple weeks ago when we talked about this, we've been praying since early November that God would kind of do this miracle of getting our budget online. Just on track. And we were going to miss the mark by like $900,000 if a certain amount of money didn't come in by December 31st, that $900,000. Well, we thought $1.1 million would come in, so we just prayed, had no other strategy but prayer, and not only did we get to the goal that we prayed for, which was $900,000 more than $1.1 million, so we can pay for all of our staff missionaries and all the wonderful things that we do as a church, but we got to $2.2 million, which is double what we thought we would. Yeah, you can clap for that. That was God's doing. So 200,000 past where we hope to be, which is going to allow us to do some amazing things in youth ministry and otherwise. We also said that since we met our goal by December 31st, we were going to take up a collection for our deacons. Those deacons distribute our money to those who are in need. And we took up kind of a cash or write a check offering on December 31st, and $25,000 came in, which was amazing. So our deacons can just give all of that away, which is amazing. So why am I telling you this now? You've already heard this news. Our staff's been praying prayers of thanksgiving. We've been in gratitude, so have our elders and trustees and our deacons. But now we got to figure out, what do we do with this money? And how do we make sure that God has all of it for himself so that he can do what? Advance the gospel with it. That's what the Apostle Paul teaches us to care about most. Now we're moving past kind of being worried about if we can pay our bills and pay all the missionaries. I call our staff members missionaries because they go out to all of the Boulder Valley trying to make a difference for Christ. Well, now we're getting back to these words here, advancing the gospel. I put that on the screen for you because as I thought about Monopoly, I thought, that's the best image I can give you. If Paul was playing Monopoly, that would have been the game piece that he would have chosen. All I care about as I go around the board, year after year, pass and go, advancing the cross of Christ. And I can do that in jail. So don't worry about me. The only thing I really care about is advancing the gospel, and it's happening, he says to his friends. The whole palace guard, they're hearing about Jesus. And that's all I care about. I'm content because of that. Now I know Nebraska is the enemy, okay? I sat, one of my friends here at this church got me a ticket for the Nebraska game. I sat in a sea of red people at the Nebraska-Colorado game this year, and they hated me because I was wearing Buffs gear. And I'd cheer whenever the Buffs would do something good, and they'd look at me and glare. Well, I do have a quick story about a guy that, he's not my friend, but he doesn't even know what a hero he is to me. He was the wide receivers coach when they won 3 national titles, and he is an outstanding Christian. And when Ron Brown coached at the University of Nebraska, they won 3 titles. He got to interview to be the head football coach at a major school on the West Coast. It will remain nameless, but a prestigious West Coast school. And he got all the way through the interview process. Now remember, Ron Brown is is a ferociously loyal disciple of Jesus, and everyone knows it in the whole nation. He's aligned with FCA, he's bold, he leads his players. The advance of the gospel is all he cares about. And I heard him telling this story at one of the coaches' conventions that I went to when I still was a college football coach. He said, I wanted that job really bad. I interviewed for this prestigious job on the West Coast, and they finally told me, Ron, we'd like to hire you, but we're not going to do it. And the reason we're not going to do it is because you're too outspoken about your faith in Jesus, and we don't think that's a fit for our campus. He said, wow, I'm not surprised that that's the reason. I'm surprised you were willing to admit it. He said, but you need to know something. Those are chains I'm willing to wear. Because if I have to suffer never getting to be a head coach because of my allegiance for Jesus, then praise God. Because I'm not going to change. Because my ambition is still the same as it was when I first started out as a coach. I want to exalt the name of Jesus. And so you're right. If you hired me, I wouldn't change. I wouldn't be able to water it down. That's who I am. And so best of luck to you. That's kind of what the Apostle Paul is saying in Philippians 1. These chains, I'm okay wearing them because the advance of the gospel is happening through the change. Now, I'm going to come back to that picture, but that's where he wrote this letter from. Notice this is called the Mamertine prison, and it is in Rome, Mamertine prison in Rome. There are no windows. It's like a dungeon. Most people think that's where he wrote the book of Philippians from, with very uncomfortable chains around his wrists and his feet, chained to other, palace guards. And probably they don't give you gauze to mend your wounds on your back, but they flog you and they make your back bleed before you go down. Probably very uncomfortable, not comfortable bedding in there. Probably, think about it, there aren't toilets and they don't flush, but you have to go to the bathroom down there. This is not a pleasant place to be, but do you detect anything but gratitude in the Apostle Paul when he writes this letter? And his friends are worried about him in Philippi, but he says, don't worry about me. Scholars tell us that the Apostle Paul probably spent 1 in 4 days, once he met Jesus, 1 in 4 days in prison at just different times. So he spent a lot of his time there. And this is just part of his life. No privacy. Very uncomfortable. This letter actually is a response, Philippians, to a care package. They had sent him some blessings, and he's writing in part to thank them. But, you can't really detect anything in him except I'm really thankful. Now, again, to illustrate this, that's a picture of Ravensbrück concentration camp. And I just kept thinking of my heroes that have imaged this point that we see in the Apostle Paul, that we're to prioritize the advance of the gospel no matter what. Well, my daughter, who's 12, is named after a woman, a hero named Corrie ten Boom. If you haven't read The Hiding Place or haven't seen the movie, this is one of the few cases where the book is as good as the movie and vice versa. It's fantastic. So moving to us that we named our daughter after this hero who hid Jews in her house and then got arrested for it. And her whole family, these watchmakers, got carted off. Remember, they didn't go to seminary, they weren't pastors, they were just doing what they thought to thwart the Nazis by hiding Jews in their hallways and in secretive ways, and they finally got arrested for it. Well, there's a wonderful story that I just love, and most of you have probably heard it, but there's at least maybe somebody here that hasn't heard it. Do you remember the story of how Corrie and her sister smuggled a Bible into the camp? And they were in line. They have clothes on at this point, and she has a bulging Bible, Corrie does, as she's in line, and they're going to search you. And she probably would have been shot on the spot had they uncovered this Bible. But she said, something told me I could pray about this for God's angels to surround me, and something told me I can endure even that place as long as I have my Bible, because we can advance the gospel if I have the Word of God as I go into the camp. So if I get shot, I get shot, but I don't think that's going to happen. She said, I had this childlike faith. God, this is a moment for you to dispatch your angels. I need my Bible. And she said, I just had this childlike faith. She said, the woman in front of me got searched 3 times, roughed up and searched 3 times. My sister behind me got searched. I didn't get searched. They just passed me through. And the conservative estimates, I don't even want to tell you because I don't want to be inaccurate, thousands of women came to Christ, they think, because of the Bible study they had in their flea-infested barracks. They would open up the Bible. And she lived to tell the story, only Corey, to come to America and all over the world to say, even in the worst circumstances, she used to say, there is no pit so deep, the love of God is not still deeper. And they just declared the matchless glory of Christ, and they saw the advance of the gospel. Friends, that is the ultimate thing to prioritize in 2024 and beyond, the gospel. And by the way, that word in Greek is just good news, euangelion. Paul says, I'm just advancing the good news. Even in jail, that's what I'm doing. And it's beautiful how it's moving from one person to the next. The good news that God has sent his son to live a perfect life and die in atonement for our sins and to be resurrected on the third day. All of this, what does it mean for you? It means this good news that you can be in God's family. If that advances, you can chain me up. I'll go to prison. I'll stay in the prison cell and talk to my new cellmate who I'm chained to. And that is the attitude, and it gives us a picture of what we are to prioritize more than anything else. And so by way of application, before we move to our last point, Paul mentions in the letter that we just read, he says, people are speaking more boldly and they're less afraid as a result of what they see happening through me. And I think that's one of our takeaways. It needs to be that maybe this is a year that you try to do something for Jesus that maybe you're scared of. Because thinking back to that college ministry campus crusade event, it was like a 3-day retreat, and one day they said, I was with all my fraternity guys, and I'll never forget, they said, okay, we're going to go over to those apartments, and we're going to knock on doors, and we're going to just talk about Jesus and share our faith. And I went, we're going to do what? Just knock on doors? I don't want to do that. And a lot of my friends, I remember they went to the movies, they just kind of opted out. They just kind of, that's a little too much for me. I'm not sure I want to do that. But some told me I need to opt in because I've been scared my whole life to really put myself out there, but this is something I need to do. And I'll never forget knocking on that first door, and we just gently just said, hey, we don't know what you have going on today, but we just want to see if there's anything we can pray for you about. And this woman invited us in for tea, and we told her about Jesus. And then it was just like something like, it wasn't profound. I think she maybe already even knew Jesus, but it was like, okay, I overcame a fear. And now I realize this is a pretty actualizing thing to do, to talk about Jesus to people that I've never done that before. And so maybe there's something that you've been scared of. Paul says when you prioritize the advance of the gospel and people see it, it's sort of contagious. Other people are less afraid. They see my change and they go, well, if he went to prison, I can be willing to go to prison too and talk about Jesus. And so I just wanted to ask you to think, before we move on to our last point, what is it that you're scared to do for Jesus? Maybe this year you could say, God, I don't want to be scared to do anything for you. So whatever that thing is, maybe ask him to help you overcome that fear. Now, the second point and the final point is this. Realize that Jesus is him. There's a second part to verse 12 through 18. We didn't talk about it at length yet, but the second part of this letter is sort of about rivalry and tension and people criticizing the Apostle Paul while he's in jail. And so realize Jesus is him. Now, this is the title of the series, and we didn't really have time last week to really fully go into it, but we're really excited about this title, and we want you to try to get your head around it. Title of the series is simply, He is Him. Now, these people are pretty famous. That's Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. I like to have fun with my 12-year-old saying, isn't that nice that Travis Kelce made her famous? And it really gets under her skin because little girls say, no, it's the other way around. She made him famous. But he's a guy that America's talking about because he's dating Taylor Swift. And this phrase, he is him, whether you realize it or not, it's very popular in kind of youth culture right now. College kids say this. In fact, my nephew came for the holidays and he announced to me, hey, Uncle Tony, just so you know, I'm him. It's just something, he was just kind of joking around, I'm that guy. So when you say he is him, basically what you're saying is like, you're the man. And a lot of people in the world, they clamor to be him, to be that guy through pride. or football or through being, popular in whatever way. And so you might hear people say, ooh, man, that guy, he's really good looking. He's got swag. He's him. You might think about guys like Ceder and guys, that are just really good at stuff. Last night we saw LeBron James' son play, in the Buffs arena. And I felt so sorry for this kid because LeBron is him, right? He's won all these titles, and here's this 18-year-old kid trying to live into his dad's legacy, and we're booing him, and he has a terrible game. And by the end of the game, Graham's saying, man, I feel sorry for that guy. Well, let's root for him. That's got to be hard. Well, just this phrase, he is him, it just occurred to us that Jesus is so other. He doesn't earn his reputation the way that the world earns it. And that's why we're saying the Christ hymn every week. Because we want you to get how Jesus earned the love that people like Paul had for him. He did it in utter humility, not by having swagger, not by having money, not by being good looking. The Bible says there was nothing about him that would attract us to him. So he was him, but he did it in a way that was so utterly humble. And I want to show you something, because when Paul's in jail, here's what's going on. People are trying to talk about envy and rivalry, knowing I've been put here for the defense of the gospel. But he says, some people, they may be Christian preachers out of, selfish ambition. But he says, what does it matter? I don't really care. The Philippians did care, because you can infer what's going on here. Is the Philippians were like, it's not right, people criticizing the Apostle Paul. We're burdened for you, because you know what people are saying about you? And he writes in response, don't care. As long as Jesus is preached, that is what I care about. I really don't care what they say about me. I do care what people are saying about him, and I really don't care what their motives are, as long as he's preached. Well, how did this come to be? I want to show you something, but first let me just illustrate. When Popeyes came out with their chicken sandwich and they said it rivals Chick-fil-A, they didn't overtly say that, but they said, we have invented the greatest chicken sandwich. My response, you know what it was? Yeah, right. No way. There's no way you can rival. Chick-fil-A, they may not do everything right. You may not think it's the greatest place in the world, but they have, in my opinion, for a fast food sandwich, that's a pretty good sandwich. And so I ate one, and I was like, it's good. It's not Chick-fil-A. Well, basically, imagine in this illustration that Paul goes into jail, and he's Chick-fil-A. And here comes Popeyes. And they say, well, now that Chick-fil-A is kind of off the map, ours is the best. Well, there were humans in churches saying that, trying to gain market share on the Apostle Paul's disciples and his influence, saying, he's in jail for a reason. You might not want a preacher that goes to jail. If you want one that doesn't go to jail, you should probably come to our church. And the Philippians were burdened by this. And Paul says, you know what? I don't care. Let them say what they want, as long as they know him. As long as his name is being preached, I don't care about my name. And he is in the image of John the Baptist right here. I love this moment where they come to John the Baptist and they say, John, Jesus is preaching, and he's baptizing more people than you right now. And John the Baptist is like, you know what? Good. Because he's him. He's the one. I'm just a voice. I'm nobody. He's the one. Follow him. Don't try to make me jealous of him. He gives this illustration. You've seen the movie Bridesmaids, where the bridesmaids ruin the wedding. He says, it's not my wedding. His wedding. He's the groom of heaven. At best case, I'm a groomsman in the wedding. Follow him. Paul says the same thing. Don't, Philippians, be burdened that people are trying to gain market share on my churches while I'm in prison. Let them say what they want, as long as his name is being preached. Now, I want to show you something beautiful, and then we'll be done. Now, you got to go back. If you want to know why the Apostle Paul loved Jesus so much, it starts here. And there's a couple of retellings of the day he met Jesus, but I want to show you some things you may not have realized before. So the Apostle Paul, if you want to know the truth, some people hunt animals, and that's their prerogative, and they eat the food and whatever. Paul didn't hunt animals. He hunted Christians and killed them and got sporty about it. He was so full of anger about Jesus' infringement. So he knew all about jealousy and strife and envy, so much so that before he became a Christian, he killed those followers of the way of Christ until this day, noon, lunchtime, Damascus, bright light, a voice. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He says, who are you, Lord? He says, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you're persecuting. Now, I want to just briefly mention two things there. Beautiful. First of all, he could have announced, like people of the world would, I'm Jesus, I'm him. He could have done it pridefully, but he gives his most humble name. I'm Jesus, the guy from Nazareth. I'm no threat to you. Nazareth was nowhere. Nazareth was not somewhere anybody would be proud to be from. Jesus could have said, I'm the Son of God, bro. You might want to chill with all your Christian killing. I would have said that. But not Jesus. He's him, and he's him in a different way. So humble, so different from the world. I'm just a guy from Nazareth. He eventually says, how's that working for you, kicking against the goads? That's a farming term about like scraping the flesh off the back of your legs if you're like an ox that's like kicking against goads. He says, I'm trying to enter into your story and you just keep kicking against me. How's that working for you? Gentle, humble. But he does something even more beautiful that doesn't come across here. You have to read kind of all three stories to get. Paul retells his story several times and he says, you know what he did? He spoke to me in Aramaic. It reminded me of this beautiful encounter I had with a Jamaican in Taos on a whitewater rafting experience. This guy worked for the FBI and he showed up in his FBI gear. Jamaican. And I came up to this guy, I was like, I'm just fascinated. You show up and you're buttoned down, and they had to give him clothes, and he was like, I'm just here. And I said, you know, Jennifer and I got engaged in Jamaica. We love Jamaica on a mission trip. And I said, I speak patois. And this guy just started laughing. It's like the native tongue of the Jamaicans. And I said, yeah, when it comes to food, me no have no bada. And he just died laughing. No bada in patois just means I don't have a preference. I don't bother with food. And I said, and he just laughed, and he was touched that I was trying to speak to him in his language. I said, can you teach me a new phrase? Because I love patois. He goes, yeah, me mash up me phone. And he showed me that his phone had cracked because he dropped it. Mash up my phone is what he was saying. It was this intimate moment of connection with somebody from an island that I'd been to, and he was touched that I was trying to speak his language. Well, when Jesus approaches Paul, he speaks Paul's language. He says his name in Aramaic, and that was part of what arrested Paul. Wait, you're speaking to me in my native tongue, and you're from Nazareth. This is what Jesus does. I don't know what your perception of him is, but Christians can reflect him so poorly. He's very nice. He's very humble. He's him, but he didn't become him the same way that the world clamors to be him. He's humble. He's gentle. He's loving. He atones for sin, and yet he's the Lion of God, according to Revelation. And so the Apostle Paul is presenting this to us in a way that is so winsome and so humble. And so in conclusion, this is kind of a New Year's resolution that I have for us. Let's make our disappointments his appointments in 2024. I read this phrase several times when I was just researching this text. If you just take the D away and change it to an S, disappointments because his appointments. And that's what Corrie ten Boom and her sister had to do. That's what Paul had to do. He could have been disappointed that he was in prison. We can be disappointed so easily by our circumstances, but the advance of the gospel trumps all, no matter what our circumstances are. And it just kind of reminded me, I was at a friend's house this week, and the worship team, if you guys want to come up now, this is my kind of where we'll land here. Anybody read this book, Pilgrim's Progress? Raise your hand. I saw it at my friend Debbie's house, and just on her, just this past week, and I was reminded of how this book, did you know it, outside the Bible, for several centuries, this book was the most translated book not named the Bible. And do you know where it was written? In a prison in England. You know, John Bunyan, the guy that wrote it in the 1600s, could have said, you know what, this stinks, I'm in jail. And people would come to the prison to hear him preach. when he was in jail. Finally, the prisoners said, we got to shut this guy up. Put him in the inner cell where nobody in England can come hear this guy make this racket anymore. And so it was when they put him in solitary confinement that he wrote the best-selling Christian book not named the Bible, maybe of all time. For several centuries, that was the book that helped people understand Jesus, illustrated in a very simple way. A disappointment became his appointment. It can be true in your life too. Let's make this the year where we say, Jesus, whatever happens, as long as the gospel is advancing, I'll rejoice. Amen? Let's sing.